Hello, everyone. Lucy Heavens here with another episode of CMO Therapy, a podcast that is hopefully going to help you navigate your way through your marketing journey. Because let me tell you, I get it. Being a marketing leader is no walk in the park. In each episode, we dive headfirst into the world of marketing, where uncertainty, tight budgets, and fierce competition are just the beginning of the roller coaster ride. But guess what? You are not alone in this journey. Why go solo when you can tap into the powerhouse of insights from some of the most awesome marketing leaders in the game? And look, the title might include the word therapy, but we are not just talking about challenges here. We are tackling them head on. So join us as we deep dive into the nitty gritty, share war stories, and unlock secret strategies. And get ready for no holds barred conversations, because sometimes I have no filter. So if you are a chief marketing officer, a marketing lead, or someone just looking to up their marketing game, then I am so glad that you are here with us today. And I am so glad to have with me the very, very awesome Lucas. Lucas, can you give a little bit of an introduction? Tell everyone about yourself.
Will do. Thanks, Lucy. Hi, I'm Lucas. So I've been in marketing in the UK client side for, 25 years, showing my age there. But I started out at first half broadly in kind of what's typically called blue chip FMCG kind of businesses. So I was at General Mills, Heineken, and Britvic soft drinks. So food and drink kind of packaged goods businesses, which is a great place to learn. The role of and the status of marketing those businesses is just very different to other places I've worked, but a great place to learn. And then the last 10 years, much more digital type businesses and typically kind of financial services. So I was at Moneysupermarket for a couple of years, at Aviva for a couple of years. And then my last two roles of my two experiences of being in founder-led businesses that are scale up. So 4 years at Cazoo and just finished up a 1-year contract at Wise.
Lovely. Wow. That is a real broad mix of different types of companies there.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this discussion. So the title of the podcast that we picked was
Mhm.
or is Founder Knows Best,
Yes.
navigating the trust, tension, and truth at the top. I like that. And where this came about is so Lucas, we're a member of a couple of the same communities, I think, like
Yeah.
marketing sort of leadership communities, and always my favorite therapy sessions that come out of those. We're also neighbours as well, aren't we?
We are.
We've lived quite closely, so that therapy session is sometimes somewhere local.
Yes.
But yes,
The pub.
one of the on the yeah, shh. One of the trickiest relationships in marketing is the one between the CMO and a founder or a CEO of the company, because founders come in all different shapes and sizes. Some are moving really fast. Some of them trust their gut. Some of them think they know marketing. Some actually do know marketing. Most don't. Should I say that? Sorry, I'm only joking. But yeah, we're talking about how trust really gets built at the top by those founders and those CEOs, and how CMOs can really lean into that founder insight without losing authority, and why this relationship can make or break your impact. So just as a kind of disclaimer, throughout this conversation, we are not talking about any one company or any one founder
Yeah.
throughout this. We are talking about the patterns that both Lucas and I in our roles, and also in those communities, what we've heard from other CMOs, and from what we kind of see and hear again and again. So cool.
Good.
Okay, let's get into it. So you mentioned in your introduction about working for a few different companies and CEOs and founders, over the years. So what are the common personality patterns that CMOs tend to run into?
Yeah. I mean, the two founders I worked for, both, I've got to say, generally really enjoyed working for both of them. I know people have had not great experiences with other founders, so I think I'm quite lucky in that respect. Both two very different people. But I think the commonality is that vision piece for sure. Like they typically have got the ability to create something pretty huge and amazing from an idea that's just occurred in their head. And often we'll come up with lots and lots of different ideas on multiple occasions. So are always kind of thinking of new ideas and are kind of got a huge amount of self-belief and optimism that they can really make things happen. And that sometimes can go too far, but it's actually quite inspiring and exciting to be part of when it works well.
Yeah, it's so true. Do you know what I love? There's something that I just absolutely love about seeing a founder or a CEO, and the CEO normally are the ones that have been with the business either from the start or, very early. But when they're talking about, the product and the journey and, where the company has kind of come from, how it was born. I mean,
Yes.
the little stars that light up in their eyes.
Yeah, and typically it's usually a nice simple story, and it kind of starts again in my experience from a customer problem, maybe one that they've experienced personally and directly, which is definitely the case with Wise, and sparked their desire to create something better. Even though it's then kind of turned into actually quite a substantial, large business, it often starts from a specific problem that they feel a kind of burning need to fix.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's so true. Yeah, they've kind of lived and breathed it, haven't they? That's obviously where the passion is coming from.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely,
yeah.
definitely.
And that's, I think, sometimes that's maybe where it becomes interesting because obviously CMOs are, we're storytellers. We have to take that story and then, kind of push that out into the hands of everybody or into the ears of everybody else. And if the founder and the CEO or the CEO are the ones that are very passionately telling that story, like how do you recreate that passion? It's like sometimes I think where maybe sort of there is a sort of a bit of tension, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly compared to if I think of a company, for example, at Heineken that I worked for, that back in the day that was founder led. So there was the Heineken family; it was still kind of very much involved, but very much not a big global corporate business where decision making is kind of deferred down to a large extent, but also quite systematized and quite structured. So you often have to go through kind of layers of approvals and things like that, or stage gates to get decisions made. But then that is kind of a good way to run a business at that scale for sure. Whereas with the founder, to an extent, you are, the business and the brand is being built in their image type thing. So really, you you have to defer your instincts as a CMO to want to kind of create something in your own image or come up with your own ideas, because if it doesn't match what's in the founder's head, you're not necessarily going to get that far. You do have to pick your battles, and be clear about are you keen to kind of drive a certain agenda just because you quite like it, or do you passionately believe that this is absolutely the right thing to do? And certainly in the case of Cazoo, they were kind of, once or twice I kind of very much stuck my neck out and kind of insisted on, for example, the end line, Cazoo, there you can, Cazoo, yeah, you can, get it right, was not something that the founder was up for at all. But I was kind of quite insistent on it. And the fact that I only really made a big deal out of one thing, I think had more of an impact. So I think if you kind of try and insist on kind of making your mark on everything, you're not going to get a huge amount of progress with a founder, most likely. Whereas in other contexts, other businesses, you probably have more of that freedom. So it's not for everyone, I don't think.
That's really interesting. Oh my goodness, my brain's just going about 50 different ways now. I've got to try it. Let me try and pin it down to
Mm.
one question at a time. The first question I have is going back to something you said kind of at the start that I think was really interesting to pick up on, is that we're talking here about there's two different things. There's the story of the company and kind of where it came from and how it was born. And then you've got a second thing of the founder or the CEO's role that they play in that. They're two different things, right?
Yeah, I think so. And also, I think as the difference between and again with Gazoo, we started off with quite a small group of people, so you're kind of constantly talking to the founder and everyone else at your level on a regular basis. When you're then sort of over 2-3 year period, 3,000-4,000 people strong, to what extent can the founder or anyone keep complete control over exactly what happens? I mean, I generally found it astonishing, the ability of actually, yeah, both founders are working with to still keep really, really close to the detail of everything. You kind of assume that you're kind of suddenly managing a very large business at that scale, that you couldn't possibly kind of be all over the detail all the time. But actually, that is what I think is quite different about a really, really strong founder versus a kind of career CEO. You do feel that they should be in the detail of everything, and they can, they're completely passionate about it. They're often slightly obsessive about it, and will think about it every single day and are into every bit of the details. So are still, very much running the show for good or bad. In my experience, generally on the whole, fairly good, but it can get quite frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then on that, then, I mean, like, there's like the second part to, or another part to what you were talking about there, about the different well, first of all, the sort of the different product lines and the different, or products, whatever you want to call it, services and things that you offer. Founders often have lots of ideas about, ways to move the business, or to kind of position things. At what point have you found, in your experience, or how do you manage that relationship between, founder and CEO, or CMO and founder or CEO, being a kind of more of a strategic partner rather than just a, marketing, I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you that we are going to be launching this product. Just go off and do it. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that is definitely a big difference between founder-led businesses and more corporate CEOs. In my experience, founders don't put a huge amount of store in lots and lots of market research before you launch something. And certainly, kind of, if it's a digital business, at least you definitely have the ability to at least do a beta launch and launch something and then see how it works and be led by the data. And actually, that's a pretty good way to understand whether something's going to work or not. So just kind of trying to kind of convince a CEO or a founder that they're kind of wrong because you have a belief or some data to prove it is a kind of often a fight not worth having. But what you can do is look at the data of actually how it's performing in marketing, and that becomes an objective data set that you can use to kind of, and sometimes you might find that you were wrong, actually, which I had a couple of times, frustratingly. Very good founders can often just have an amazing instinct and maybe even know your job better than you are, which was just quite a new experience for me. So actually having a bit of humility and being open to trying stuff that you wouldn't normally feel comfortable doing, because these people are entrepreneurs. They have a different view of risk, but really, as much as possible, be objective about how these products or ideas perform once they're live, rather than trying to kind of resist launching it in the first place, which is different, right? And it can feel a bit scary, but can also be quite exciting.
Yeah. There's always that like, I can't think of a better way of describing it, but I call it the ugly baby, story, right? You have at some point, this you have to have that conversation of, unfortunately, everybody thinks their baby is the most beautiful thing in the world, right? And founders, equally, they love their products and they love their services. They think it's amazing, but sometimes you have to sort of tell them that their baby's a little bit ugly.
Sometimes you have to kill your babies, which is also not a very nice phrase for parents, but that is, sometimes you do. Not literally.
But no, you're right. Yeah, like, not telling them when to stop, and I suppose that's when you, like, going back to what you were saying, like, use the data, right?
Yeah. And that's the phrase I liked a lot, and this came from Cazoo, is just like, data takes opinions off the table. Doesn't always, actually. Sometimes we kind of made a joke that just like everyone has to be data led unless you're the founder, but at least you've got a better chance of getting buy-in if you've got a solid bit of objective data about how things work. Because I guess the other kind of key characteristic of founders is they're probably very used to people telling them till they're blue in the face that they're wrong and what they're going to do is going to fail, and actually it doesn't, and actually performs very well. So that was definitely true of Cazoo. No lack of people lining up to tell us that no one would ever buy a used car from a website ever. And actually, I think founders often get quite a kind of big thrill about proving people wrong. So actually, you're more like to kind of be a red rag to a bull to tell someone like that things can't be done, or it can't be done in the time frame, or it can't be done for the budget that you've been given. So like kind of the last person that's likely to say no for an answer. So you need to kind of work out how to navigate that personality, and it'll be different for each different founder, I'm pretty sure.
Hi there, quick breather while your brain connects the dots. If you're enjoying CMO therapy, please hit that follow button and leave a cheeky little rating. 5 stars if you're feeling generous, or 4 if you're British and emotionally reserved. Either way, it helps more than you think. Right, let's crack on. Yeah, I think timing plays a role in this. I remember years ago, this is like before COVID, but I was involved with a company that were going through fundraising, and it was really interesting because the founder was one of those very animated, energetic, passionate presenters, and I did really lean into that. It was fantastic. Like, they were up on stage and kind of talking and doing videos and all of these great things. But then when we were going through the fundraise, they were having those conversations in the background of, like what you said, like having sometimes sort of negative conversations, with investors and things like that, really questioning them hard. And then coming off of the back of that investor call and then going, pushing them straight on stage and
Sure.
expecting them to be all happy and performing and passionate
Yeah.
about it. It's kind of, that's a
Yeah.
bit of a, it's a bit of a tough ask, isn't it?
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
I mean, Cazoo, the founder had done multiple kind of scale ups before, so super experienced and very capable, and could definitely switch modes. Very very good at selling an idea, whether it's to the internal audience, external audience, investors, what have you. But also that ability to go from the kind of broad vision piece down into micro detail
Mm.
is pretty unique, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's so many things that you can do with that, and yeah, just having them. Um, I know this is, I always find this, having them on like a little video or something like that. You think that you're getting one thing out of them, and then they come along and kind of tell a story, and you're just like, oh my goodness, now there's like
Yes.
something else there as well. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe that's kind of what you could do with AI now. You could replicate them as some kind of avatar.
Yeah, yeah.
The flip side, the other thing, actually thinking about it now, is you have to be able to keep up with them on that level as well, particularly when it
Mm,
comes to knowing the detail of your numbers. And I've definitely been caught out before where I've kind of been trying to kind of tell a broader picture in a story. I'm not close enough to actually the detail of the numbers. So if your kind of personal credibility as a CMO or other functions, you have to know your numbers, which is, arguably that's true in a bunch of different businesses, but typically, my experience, founders are very, very good at both the detail and the numbers, and the vision piece, and just trying to just tell a good story without the numbers to back it up, it can backfire quite badly. And it's
how would you navigate that? Like, what's the best, what's the best kind of advice that you would give, or way that you've found to kind of get around that?
I think the key thing that I picked up certainly in Wise is show don't tell.
Hmm.
And we were kind of very much leaning into we were kind of foreseeing us getting to a performance plateau in terms of investing in performance marketing, that working really well up until a point, and then you really have to think about investing in brand really for the first time, when it had been a very successful business for over 10 years without really having to do that at all. So a very big thorny issue to deal with. Lots of really interesting kind of theories and stuff you can bring to the table about how things work, and the 60/40 rule and the performance plateau and the rest of it. But it's not really worth anything unless you can prove it with your actual data. You can secure a budget to get a test going, but actually to get real credibility, you have to be able to prove with your own numbers in the business what's working and what's not, and why. And if it's not working, no amount of other theories or examples from other businesses is really going to be able to change the story. So you can have a theory and great story, but you have to be able to back it up with hard data about your specific business and how it performs.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that it goes back to that. The point that they hired you at the end of the day to be the marketing expert, right? Like they
Yeah.
know that they're deep down, whether they admit it or not, they know that they're not kind of marketing experts. You are. So that's what you bring to the table in that conversation, don't you?
Yes,
And
and depending on the kind of background and the preferences of the founder, that either works or not. If they're a very techie kind of computer engineer, rational thinker, trying to convince them how people actually think and consumers make decisions, and it's not always that rational, is quite difficult. Whereas if you are working with a founder who actually is quite bought into the idea of brand, and actually is really happy to invest, that's a much easier conversation to have. But it can vary quite a lot.
that's it. You've just hit on something there. You said about the consumer. Obviously the customers and how they buy. And one of the things about, founders and CEOs is um, they always have that kind of real sort of intrinsic understanding of customers, right? Like that's their bag, like that's their where they come from.
Mm.
So maybe that's kind of the way to lean into it then.
It's very true. It's very true. And actually, again, I was kind of in some instances, if you're coming up with opinion, you haven't got very specific evidence that you've spoken to customers, then that can kind of catch you out as well. Um, and there's a real expectation that you are talking to customers all the time, which of course, as marketers, you kind of want to do, but sometimes actually you've got to be honest with yourself. Is actually, have I spoken to a specific customer about this problem, or am I making some assumptions based on my own experience? And you're right, yeah, and I think potentially founders see it as their duty to remind people of, what's made that business successful is by building something amazing for customers. And as you can scale and get big and the rest of it, that's harder and harder to sustain that closeness to a customer, but it's really, really critically important. And often it's often the founder that needs to remind you of whether you're genuinely doing that or not.
Yeah. How often did you kind of have conversations with the founder and CEOs about, their to pick those insights like for customers off of them?
Not so much. I mean, I think that, yeah, depending on the instance, it's either that they are looking at what competitors are doing or have come up with their own insights and ideas of what they want to do next, or they'll expect you to have done the research and the insight yourself. So not that often that they will come to you with like, I've spoken to this customer and they said this, and I think you should do that. Occasionally, but more often it's and that's just more of a challenge on me or my team that actually we have spoken to customers. We need to prove it. We need to kind of bring it to life, and then often that can smooth things over and kind of allow you to do more with it. But like really demonstrate that you know your numbers, you've spoken to customers, you've got a real strong case for whatever it is that you're proposing.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I suppose leaning on the kind of it's not all negative.
Yeah.
There's a lot of positivity, kind of a lot of positive things that come out of this. And I did a podcast ages ago, last year, I think, with another CMO, and I love her phrase. I steal it all the time, and her phrase was "still with pride." So
Yes.
we were talking about in particular where the sales team or anybody in the company, when everybody kind of thinks they're a marketer and they're coming up with ideas, all the
Yeah.
time. Some of them you can steal with pride. I think that's
Yes.
definitely true of some of those founder ideas because normally they are the wackiest, aren't they? Where have you in the past? You don't need to name companies, but like where have you in the past had wacky ideas or great ideas that you've stolen with pride?
Well, the entire Cazoo proposition was copied from say there was a business in the States called Carvana that had kind of over a number of years built out a kind of used car sales proposition online and kind of scaling nationally in America, which was a huge country. And part of the investment hypothesis for kind of early investors is, well, there's no reason why this shouldn't work in the UK, and it's a smaller country, so logistically much easier. And the founder had actually done that multiple times before, copied, and he called himself an imitator, not an innovator. So like copy what's working in the States, low risk, you can move quickly, and that works pretty well. So Stealing with pride, for sure, in that example. But even I find it useful. Often my role's been about creating advertising, maybe for the first time, for whether it's Cazoo or Wise or what have you. Often it's useful to actually come up with specific examples of other brands and maybe two or three slightly different examples and get just sense test and test the water on which kind of, I think this is very good. And as an example, is that kind of broad direction of the type of advertising we should do. What do you think? And that rather than getting them to sign off on a brief, which isn't necessarily that informative, or just, hoping, just coming out with something, hoping they'll like it, actually having an early discussion on what type of thing they think is right. And often they'll be kind of have really good instincts on what's going to work. So a little bit kind of copying broad ideas or structures of advertising that have happened with other categories, other brands is really helpful.
That's a really great way. I love that. And like thinking about when we were talking a minute ago about sometimes those conversations with founders or CEOs around kind of, oh, we're going to have to kind of invest in brand. I mean, it's something that marketing kind of often talk about, but I do feel like we're, what's the word, setting ourselves up for unsuccess a little bit when we start a conversation like that. But
Yes.
yeah, maybe the better way then is exactly what you said, is actually here's a couple of examples of, I think, like how we could kind of, sort of position ourselves or tell our story or message or whatever through these sort of, like advertising or brand campaigns,
Sure.
and get them on board with it that way. And then you can go into the kind of story, and this is the impact that I think that it will have, which is what we need.
Yeah. And particularly where it's a tech-led business or a challenger brand. So typically any kind of founder-led business is likely to be a challenger brand and we're challenging incumbents. It can be really informative. The classic one is Amazon, where Jeff Bezos famously called advertising a tax on having a poor product and refused to advertise for a number of years. And look at them now; they are the biggest advertiser on the planet. They do outstanding creative. And he's not going to be a sort of guy who's dumb or going to waste a load of money on something that doesn't work. So and there's a bunch of other examples, but that's a really helpful example of a creative construct that works really well usually when they do advertising. The fact that they invest heavily and see the value in it, as opposed to looking at kind of other categories of products that have been around for decades and aren't that relevant. Picking the right examples is really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. So if you were coaching a CMO that was joining a founder next week in a new
Yeah,
role in a founder-led company, what would you tell them? Like, what would you tell them to do less of immediately? What would you tell them to do more of immediately?
definitely steer clear of any kind of jargon, which I prefer to do anyway. But like talk in real simple terms, not because they're dumb, but just like in terms of talk about customers and customer insight, talk about commerciality and what's the return on investment. Um, Either consume language or the language of the CFO. Um, Try and kind of have an understanding of what the mindset of the founder is. If you've been through an interview process, you probably have got a feel for what they're like, because they're all probably slightly different, got slightly different agendas, and be really clear about where you're going to kind of pick your battles. If you're going to have a disagreement, is it something that you really feel is fundamentally important, or are you happy just to kind of disagree and commit, as the phrase goes? Because certainly compared to a kind of career corporate CEO, you're more likely to kind of run into issues if you're kind of constantly disagreeing with the founder. You do have to defer to them quite a lot and be comfortable with that. And that comes with the territory to an extent. But like there may be specific areas where you really have a kind of firm belief that you want to go in that direction. It's slightly different to what they're saying, but do that as rarely as possible.
How I'm going to try and phrase this question right. I don't know how this is going to come out, but when kind of sort of dealing with founders and CEOs both,
Yeah.
how much do you lean on kind of other sort of colleagues in terms of sort of other senior management team members to kind of get them on board and to help to sort of deliver deliver that story?
Yeah, I think that's probably another key difference with founders. I've not I've not worked with that many founders and not necessarily been always that successful about winning them over either. But typically, that's the key difference: is founders don't listen to a huge amount of other people, and it's more about your direct relationship with them and whether that works or not. I think it's more in a kind of broader corporate setting where you need to kind of manage the kind of matrix around and be a bit more kind of smart about getting other people to kind of support your agenda. I feel that's kind of less critical with a founder-led business. If if you can get the founder on board, everything else follows pretty quickly. And they don't necessarily always listen to other people anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Like building, like we said at the start, right? Building the kind of the trusted relationship with them and yeah, is key, I think.
Yeah.
And then yeah, just lastly, I mean, is there anything that you would kind of any stories, I suppose, from past? Again, you don't need to mention names of companies,
Yeah.
but where you've kind of had some successes and some fails or some learnings is the way I like to put it.
I mean, I guess that one key one for me is show don't tell. And of course, like if you're an experienced marketer, you know a lot of the theories and the background reading and things like that. It trying to articulate that through really any senior management, certainly founders, typically have a very short attention span apart from anything. Also super, super smart. So keep things, if you're going to go down the route of explaining theory, either don't at all or find it a very, very succinct way and a clear way of explaining it. But more importantly, anything, do experiments if you need to generate the data, but get the right data and prove the theory in practice if you want to really get belief and buy-in. Arguably, that's true of any kind of business, but I think it's particularly true for founders.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. That's worked for me as well, is having if you are going to kind of go through a little bit of a slide deck and founder loves a slide deck, right? But just the slides have two or three kind of bullet points on them. Keep the bullet points really short, but the thing that I like to do is try to sort of think about making them almost like a bit of a tease.
Yes.
Because, and then when you kind of talk about it, but very, like you say, very the show don't tell sort of thing. Just show them something and
Yeah.
then pause.
Yeah.
Just pause and wait, because actually what will normally happen is the questions will start, and that's what you want, don't you? You want the questions then, because then it comes like part of a conversation.
Yeah. And then you can start teasing out to what extent are they open to influence or not, because
Yes.
that's a key thing. Sometimes if they're just not open to influence, it might not be worth carrying on the conversation too much, but there might be a way in a particular angle or something they actually haven't made their mind up about yet, that you can help guide them in a certain direction, but sometimes they're just not open to that conversation at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And it kind of gets them excited about something. And then actually, when they do start having all of those ideas, that's when the still with pride comes in, right?
Yes. Exactly that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. This has been really helpful. Some really, really
Yeah.
good pieces of information and now like advice for people. And yeah, I'm sure everyone will really appreciate it. So thank you very
Yeah,
much.
no problem.
And thank you to the audience for listening today. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.